Top story tonight. After days of back and forth, the United States President Donald Trump has made his biggest U-turn. He has pulled out of the meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong Un. The meeting that was supposed to happen on the 12th of June in Singapore now stands cancelled. A statement released by the White House reads, and I'm quoting, "Sadly, based on the tremendous anger and open hostility displayed in your most recent statement, I felt it is inappropriate at this time to have this long-planned meeting. Let this letter serve to represent that the Singapore summit for the good of both parties, but to the detriment of the world, will not take place." The statement also issues a veiled threat to North Korea. It says, and I quote again, "You talk about your nuclear capabilities, but ours are so massive and powerful that I pray to God that they will never be used." That's classic Donald Trump for you. Pinning the blame squarely on North Korea, the United States said that North Korea has lost a great opportunity for lasting peace and great prosperity and wealth. Trump went on to say that this missed opportunity is a sad moment in history. The decision to call off the summit comes a day after North Korean official lashed out at U.S. Vice President Mike Pence. He called him a political dummy. Pyongyang had also warned of a nuclear confrontation with the United States if the talks were to fail. Listen in.
He has demonstrated an enormous capacity to lead his country and his team. So I don't think that's it. And frankly, I don't really know that I want to speculate as to why it is they took the actions, because I don't think we know. What I am hopeful is that we can continue to have conversations and put this back on track so that we can get to a place where we can achieve the outcome. I think it's worth. We talk a lot about summits and deals and the like. It's not about the deal. It's about the outcome. Right? It's about achieving this permanent physical change and transformation that will have the opportunity to change the world. And it is a corollary to that is a fundamental change in North Korea that would lead North Korea to have this opportunity for prosperity and good things, all the things that their neighbors to the south have. There will have to be a deal to get us to that point. But we shouldn't spend all our time thinking about the deal.
Let's go straight to our correspondent, Andrea Arenas. He's joining us from Washington, D.C., and we'll then open this to our special panel of guests this evening. Stephen Golub, international affairs expert with us from California. Dr. Robert Edwin Kelly, who is an expert on inter-Korean affairs with us from Busan in South Korea. And Einar Tangen, political and economic expert from Beijing in China. Good evening to all of you. Andrea, let me begin with you. What have you picked up from the White House? What prompted this cancellation? Has the Trump administration given any specific reasons beyond the open hostility exhibited by North Korea?
We are still waiting for the White House for a press conference that should happen at any moment, and we should have more details on the reasons that prompted this cancellation. However, it's a formal cancellation of a meeting that had been in the works for months now. President Trump and the White House did release this letter this morning, citing tremendous hostility and anger, and the particular reason being what happened during the past 12 to 24 hours. The comment on Vice President Mike Pence, citing him as ignorant and stupid, saying that this was after Vice President Pence went on an interview, a televised interview, where he said that relations with North Korea would end just like the ones ended with Libya if North Korea did not reach an agreement with the United States. Now, just moments ago in Congress, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was testifying, and he did say that the Trump administration was looking for a complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. This is something that was not necessarily the case for North Korea, or perhaps they were looking at a more progressively denuclearizing the peninsula, not necessarily going into it all at once. Now, he did say, however, that that America as well as President Trump were ready for these talks. That was when he was asked if this move made America stronger or weaker, and he also did say that the reason for this was that North Korea was not cooperating in the arrangements and setting up this meeting.
Sure. Dr. Robert Kelly, are you surprised that Donald Trump has pulled out?
Not especially. Things were going pretty off the rails in the last couple of weeks. The Trump administration hadn't really organized this particularly well. There was a lot of conflicting information and messaging discipline coming from the White House. I think the White House had sky-high expectations that were unjustified, the Nobel Prize thing and all that kind of stuff. The North Koreans were almost certainly never going to give up all their nuclear weapons. They spent 40 years developing these things. It would have been simply astonishing if they had given them up after 9 weeks. It would have been better if the president had, managed expectations to something like a freeze from the North Koreans, but he did not, and the North Koreans eventually pushed back, and so here we are.
Right. I'm told you have to leave, so I'm going to ask you a couple of more questions, and I request the other guests to wait. Dr. Kelly, how do you expect Kim Jong Un to respond now? Will he feel shortchanged that he released the American hostages, that he apparently destroyed a nuclear testing facility, and then he got nothing in return from the Americans? The talks were cancelled.
Right. I think the hostage release wasn't a particularly big concession on the northern side. They were hostages, and the North Koreans have given up American hostages in the past. The test site that was destroyed was, many people think, sort of corrupted from previous tests before. If there had been another one, there was concern there might be something like a North Korean Chernobyl. I think the real issue that the North Koreans will react very badly to is the implicit nuclear threat that the president made in his letter. That's what I'm really concerned about, because the North Koreans just don't respond to that kind of stuff very well. We know that the North Koreans tend to counterpunch when they're threatened, and a nuclear threat is pretty over the top. And so, yeah, I think this is going to get very, not very bad, but bad in the next week or so.
So what happens then to peace talks and the hope of rapprochement between the two Koreas and between America and North Korea? And if it's a loss for everyone, would you say that it's a bigger loss for North Korea than the Americans?
I think this is going to get kicked back to the South Koreans. Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, has really emphasized negotiation with the North Koreans. He's made this sort of the centerpiece of his career now for the last 25 years. He's certainly the one who's pushed this very hard, and now it's really up to him to bridge the gap. He tried to do that in Washington, I think, yesterday. Moon Jae-in is supposed to meet the North Koreans again in the fall. He's supposed to go to Pyongyang. So that doesn't mean that the door to diplomacy is completely shut. He can actually go up there and try to get some kind of deal. And maybe the cancellation today is actually just a postponement. If Donald Trump and Kim can meet in 3 to 6 months or something like that, after some staff work has been done to create a framework, so this isn't quite so thrown together. I mean, this has been very sort of disorganized in the last couple of weeks. That doesn't mean it has to be completely canceled, but it could be postponed, and there could be staff work and diplomacy done in order to put this all together so it's a little bit clearer what the two sides are negotiating on. And I think that's what Moon is probably going to try to do, is keep this alive so that it doesn't go back to where we were 6 months ago with fire and fury and war threats and all that.
Dr. Stephen Golub, the only silver lining from this development, Donald Trump isn't getting the Nobel Peace Prize in a hurry. Did you expect this to happen?
I would echo and defer to Dr. Kelly's expertise in terms of everything he said. It made a lot of sense to me. Donald Trump certainly got himself into this at least temporary mess by making the rather mercurial decision to say, yes, let's meet and work out the details later of what this summit will be and what an agreement might be. That's not the way statecraft usually works. That's not the way summits between world leaders usually work. One thing I think I'd add to the whole calculation of what's going on here is you have to bear in mind that two of Trump's top foreign policy advisors, his national security advisor, John Bolton, especially, and also his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, have been very hawkish historically on North Korea in terms of maybe seeking a military solution, and that in addition to perhaps being played by Kim Jong Un to some extent in the lead up to these negotiations, in terms of Kim coming across as a beneficent figure, willing to negotiate, Trump may have been played by his national security advisor, John Bolton, in terms of either whispering in his ear or making his public statements, Bolton's statements, about a Libya model, which probably horrified the North Koreans, since the Libyan dictator ended up, after giving up his nuclear program several years later, ended up being deposed by his own people, possibly simply because he didn't have nuclear weapons. So there's a lot going on here, but I think one fundamental factor is Donald Trump's shortcomings as a world leader and someone capable of negotiating something in ways that go beyond the way a New York City real estate magnate might negotiate matters.
Aina Tangan, what do you think triggered this? Did Donald Trump develop cold feet? Was he just looking for an easy exit because his vice president being called a political pawn or whatever it was that he was called wasn't such a bad term given the history of these two leaders?
Well, I think you're right there. I mean, being called a political dummy is far from being called a rocket man and all sorts of belittling comments that Donald Trump has made in the past. But really what you see here is, and I defer to my two previous colleagues, I think they're exactly right, but Donald Trump is flailing right now. He's really beset by a lot of issues. Things with China did not go very well. He is really facing it with Europe over Iran. And yet he seems intent on...
I'm sorry to interrupt, China. I'll come back to you. Donald Trump making a statement right now.
Singapore on June 12th. Well, many things can happen, and a great opportunity lies ahead, potentially. I believe that this is a tremendous setback for North Korea, and indeed a setback for the world. I've spoken to General Mattis and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and our military, which is by far the most powerful anywhere in the world, that has been greatly enhanced recently, as you all know, is ready if necessary. Likewise, I have spoken to South Korea and Japan, and they are not only ready should foolish or reckless acts be taken by North Korea, but they are willing to shoulder much of the cost of any financial burden, any of the costs associated by the United States in operations if such an unfortunate situation is forced upon us. Hopefully, positive things will be taking place with respect to the future of North Korea. But if they don't, we are more ready than we have ever been before. North Korea has the opportunity to end decades of poverty and oppression by following the path of denuclearization and joining the community of nations. And I hope that Kim Jong Un will ultimately do what is right, not only for himself, but perhaps most importantly, what's right for his people, who are suffering greatly and needlessly. All of the Korean people, North and South, deserve to be able to live together in harmony, prosperity, and peace. That bright and beautiful future can only happen when the threat of nuclear weapons is removed. No way it can happen otherwise. If and when Kim Jong Un chooses to engage in constructive dialogue and actions, I am waiting. In the meantime, our very strong sanctions, by far the strongest sanctions ever imposed, and maximum pressure campaign will continue, as it has been continuing. But no matter what happens and what we do, we will never, ever compromise the safety and security of the United States of America. I want to make that statement, feel very, very strongly about it. Our military, as you know, has been greatly enhanced. Will soon be at a level that it's never been before. Our approval of $700 billion this year and $716 billion next year, largely due to the help of a lot of the people with me today and standing right here. We appreciate. but we had to do that for our military, and we've done it. And hopefully everything's going to work out well with North Korea. And a lot of things can happen, including the fact that perhaps, and would wait, it's possible that the existing summit could take place or a summit at some later date. Nobody should be anxious. We have to get it right. Okay. With that being said, we have something else, which I have to tell you, all of you, Chairman, Mike, and everybody, it was a big deal until this came up. I don't know. Where's Mike Crapo? Where are you? Mike, congratulations. You did a great job, but it doesn't seem so important now. I don't know. But it is important. It's incredible. And it's incredible that you've done it, and you've done it in a very bipartisan way, which is very nice. Thank you. Thank you very much, but a very bipartisan way, Mike, and I want to congratulate you and everyone else. I'm going to read a few names because these people worked hard. This is all about the Dodd-Frank.
So that was Donald Trump explaining, and he said, and whatever it means, he said that hopefully positive things will be taking place with respect to the future of North Korea. That's the President of America speaking for you after having cancelled one of the biggest meetings he was scheduled to attend in this year. I'm sorry to have interrupted you, Einar, earlier. You were making a point about what could have triggered this, why Donald Trump decided at the last moment to call it off.
Well, quite frankly, we've just seen it. It's a kind of wag the dog moment. Donald Trump is flailing in terms of all sorts of lawsuits and investigations in the U.S. Things did not go very well with China. He has Europe enraged over the Iran deal and also these trade sanctions. At the moment, he's a little bit friendless, and I think he's trying to appear very strong. So this kind of gives him that opportunity. Unfortunately, I agree with my colleagues. This is not the way to lure North Korea into a summit talk. Playing the playground bully, or at least at most a kind of a mafia type figure. If you don't do this, bad things could happen, is not the way that you do diplomacy. I'm actually very, very surprised that he's going to this length. That statement in itself was not helpful. It's not going to bring these parties together. I think it's a great setback for everybody. I don't think that there was a lot of hope inside things, but inside having this kind of summit, because there's such a difference between the time frames. The U.S. said 6 months to a year, absolute denuclearization, verifiable, transparent, etc. And North Korea was upset by this idea of a Libya model, and they certainly were not going to give up the only leverage that they had.
Dr. Stephen Golub, did you think China have a role to play? Did it queer the pitch?
Is your question, did China have a role to play in this summit falling apart?
Yes.
I don't know. I don't think so. It seems like this was really a product of the dynamic that had developed of a very, very poorly prepared summit meeting, where the expectations of the two sides just became increasingly apparent that their expectations were very far apart. There are two fundamental things to understand just in terms of the context of what's going on right now. Number one is that the demands or the goals of these two sides are in complete contradiction to each other. North Korea is not going to give up its nuclear weapons, and the U.S. is insisting that it completely give up its nuclear weapons. The other thing that your viewers need to understand about Donald Trump that goes beyond but includes what's going on right now with this failed summit planning is that the man has no knowledge of or really deep interest in foreign policy, is even incapable, and that's not too strong a word, incapable of absorbing detailed information. He does not read policy briefs. There have been repeated reports of that coming out, whether it's a learning disability or whatever. So in terms of Trump dealing with the complexities and the challenges of relating to North Korea and trying to reach some kind of accommodation, avoiding war, he's in over his head. And I know that's a worrisome thing to say, but it's true. It's reflected, for example, in the statement we just heard, where he said South Korea and Japan will pick up the the costs of apparently going to war. The last thing that South Korea is worried about right now is whether it has to pick up the costs of going to war. It's that millions of people, South Koreans, may die, and tens of thousands of Americans as well over there if there is a war. And Trump's statement just doesn't reflect any insight into that complex situation that he's in charge of dealing with.
Aina Tangin, what happens now? Can one still expect both sides to continue some sort of diplomatic engagement, given that both these two leaders are so hypersensitive and suffer from a persecution complex?
You're right on that. You couldn't really find two more thin-skinned individuals. I think really the move is going to be with China and South Korea. They're going to be looking for some face-saving way of drawing these people back together, especially Moon Jae-in. He has put a lot of political capital on this particular, arranging the summit. He was the one who was playing post office, whispering to each side what he thought they wanted to hear in order to make this happen. His belief, as we said, is based on protecting his people. He has 1/4 of his population within range of artillery pieces, never mind nuclear weapons, artillery pieces. So at that basis, yes, I think you can look to Moon Jae-in to try to figure something out. I don't think you're going to see any movement either by North Korea or Donald Trump.
We haven't heard the last of this, of course. Aina Tangin, Stephen Golub, thanks very much for joining us on this discussion.